Hi, my name is Mike Rossi, and this is another tutorial from UnityCookie.com. On this video, I'll be covering how to create a loading screen for your game. Before I get started, I just want to note a few things. First off, this particular implementation of a loading screen will require Unity Pro. This implementation uses a call called application.loadLevelAsync, which is actually a Unity Pro feature. So just keep that in mind for this tutorial, that if you want to implement this style of loading screen, it will require Unity Pro. Also, I just want to mention real quick, I'm going to be covering coroutines in this tutorial as well. And these can be a little bit of a complex subject if you've never used them before. So if my explanation is at all not clear, go ahead and check out Unity's website. They've got a nice little documentation here on exactly how to use coroutines, some examples, what they're good for, and why we use them, because they're incredibly efficient when used in the right cases. So with that, let me show you a quick demo of what I'm going to be making here. So this is just a quick little build, web player build I made, where so when I hit spacebar, it's going to switch between two different scenes. It's going to, if I'm in scene 1, it's going to load to 2 back to 1. And in between that load, it's going to bring up a loading screen that's going to tell me the progress of loading. So if I just go ahead and let me show you. If I hit spacebar there, it showed the loading screen, brings me to 2. If I hit spacebar again, gives me a loading screen, brings me back to 1. Now, again, on my computer, it's very fast, and that's because the computer that I'm currently using is pretty quick, so it doesn't take very long to load. But that's not going to be the same. That's not going to be like that for all computers, and especially all games. It's going to depend on how much you have to load. For instance, in scene 2 here, I've got some terrain elements that it's also loading, so it's going to take a little bit longer to load scene 2 as opposed to scene 1. So the reason that we put loading screens in our games is so that when the player is switching between scenes and we're loading, instead of just the game just halting and stopping and freezing where it's at and then loading the next scene, and then once that scene's loaded, the game goes back, basically unpauses and starts playing. We put up a loading screen so that the player knows, hey, everything's okay, we're loading. Don't worry, you might have thought the game had frozen, but it hasn't. We're just loading some assets. And this is actually, by most, depending on where you're putting your game, if you're releasing it, the manufacturer or the console manufacturer or whatever you're putting it up on actually might require that you have a loading screen. For instance, the major consoles, they have certification requirements that say you have to have a loading screen in between scenes. They even get really strict, whereas like if you, after so many seconds of seeing a loading screen, you have to display something else or something more, and it has to be an animated loading screen. So, but the reason they do that is because it's a good tool so that the player doesn't think that the game has frozen and broken and they don't have to restart, everything's okay. So this is a really useful thing to add into your game. So with that, let me just demo it one last time, and then let's go ahead and jump into Unity. So what I have here is I've just set up 2 really simple scenes, scene 1, scene 2. I've made a few textures here, a couple grid textures for the skybox that I have here, and a couple black and a white texture that I'm going to use for the actual loading screen itself. So to get started, I'm actually going to build a prefab. So I'm going to just go ahead and create an empty game object, and I'm going to put that at 0. And then I'm going to call it loading screen. This is going to be my prefab for it, because I'm turning it into a prefab because I want to use this across all of my scenes in my game. And I only want to have to, it's all going to do the same thing, but the only thing that's going to be different is what level it loads. So I'm going to go ahead and create that prefab. So just create a new prefab, call it loading screen, and then I'm going to go ahead and associate this game object to there, and see it's turned blue, so that prefab is now associated as a prefab. So that's all good. We're set there. So the next thing I want to do is I actually want to make a C# script. It's going to be same name, loading screen. This is where all the action's going to happen in here. So go ahead and open that up. And before I get started into doing the actually animated one, I'm going to demo what it's like if you're doing the standard load level. So first what I want to be able to have a public string variable that I pass into this called level to load. And this is going to be the level that I want the prefab to load to. And then in the update function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little check that if input.get key down, I'm going to check if the space bar has been pressed, and if it's been pressed, I want to do application.load level, and then I'm going to do level to load. Okay. So basically what's going to happen here is in my update function, if it sees the spacebar get hit, it's going to load the level that I've passed into here. So with that, let's switch back over to Unity, and no compilers, good. So I'm going to go ahead and associate this script to the prefab. See it there, it's a new component. I'm going to go ahead and apply so it saves that component to the prefab. And then for this one, I want it to load scene 2, because we're in scene 1. Now before that's actually going to work, I actually need to go to my build settings and add my 2 scenes to there. So I just grabbed them, dragged them into build settings, and now I can actually load between them. If they weren't in the build settings, it would give me an error saying, hey, it doesn't know where these scenes are. They're not valid in the build settings. So go ahead and save that. So now I just need to switch to scene 2. Like I said, scene 2's just got some extra terrain things in there, so it's a little bit longer of a load time there to kind of reflect what a game might entail, like what a game might have in its scene. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag that prefab there. I've already got my script associated. I just need to change the level to load to scene 1. Okay, so if I did everything right, what should happen is when I play here and hit spacebar, it should load to scene 2. Perfect. Okay, so we've moved to scene 2, but we haven't seen any visual display. We don't know that the loading is happening. If we had things moving in our scene, they might have frozen there while Unity was trying to load the next scene. So we don't want that. We want some sort of display on there to give the player some feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and add onto this prefab. So I'm going to go ahead and create a couple empty game objects. The first one, and I'm just going to go ahead and attach them under the loading screen. And I want to zero them out so they're at the origin. Just to make some of my math and whatnot easier here. Okay, and that one's zeroed out. Okay, so the first object I'm going to do is I'm going to create a background. This is going to be the background of our loading screen that we're going to see. And I'm going to go ahead and add a component rendering GUI texture. And this one, like I said, I want it to the background, so I'm going to use the black texture here. You can see in the game view down here, it's the black texture showing up kind of down in the corner. That's because the anchor point for the texture is at the bottom left corner right now, because it's 0, 0. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that to 0.5, 0.5, and I'm scaling it in the X direction on the screen, a full screen, and on the Y, 1, which is a full screen. The Z doesn't matter for this since we're in a 2D, we're right on the front of the camera, so it's 2D, so it doesn't have a Z scale. So with that, so we've got our background. So now I need to do the next object I want is actually a text object. Oops, didn't click that. So a text. This is going to display our, current progress and give us a percentage. And with that, I'm going to do rendering again, but this time I'm going to use GUI text. So I'm going to go ahead and just put some default text in here. Current progress. I guess that should be loading progress. That way, just some text so I can see it on screen. But I actually can't see it right now, and that's because the background texture and this GUI text are on the same Z plane, same Z depth. So GUI elements like this, GUI components, actually do have Z positions, whereas they don't have Z scale. So with the text, or I'm sorry, the background, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to back that one space back. And why is that 0, 0, 0, background, -1, loading progress, 0, 0, 0. Oh, because I don't have it on screen, of course. There we go. So there we go. And now, so I have it in this. I have it centered. Sorry about that. I lost track. And then I actually want to change my anchor point to be lower centered. So it's centering that right there in the anchor. Or I'm sorry, it should be like right here. The anchor point for that object. That's why I couldn't see it before, because the anchor point's in a weird spot. And let's see, what else do I want to edit? So I'm going to use the same font, just the default Arial, and then I'm going to also make this a little bit larger, set the font size to 32. And then I'm going to leave all the other settings as is. All right, so the last game object that I'm going to do is actually a progress bar. So in most loading screens, you've probably seen like, a circle turning or some sort of bar that reaches across the screen, and as it gets to 100%, it fills up the screen. So what we're going to do one is this one's going to be in the center, or it's going to be a little bit below the text in the center of the screen, and it's going to start at the center and then spread out to the sides. And when it hits the sides, it's going to, that'll mean that the scene has loaded, and the scene will then load. So with this, I'm going to rename it to progress bar. And for this component, I'm going to use a GUI texture. So go to rendering, GUI texture, and I'm actually going to use the white one here. So like again, it's bringing it here, it's showing here. We're actually going to position it at 0.5 and 0.25, so it's going to go up a little bit, but we're going to change the scale. We're going to leave the X and the 1, but we're going to change the Y to 0.05, so we have a little thin bar that takes up a fifth of the screen in the Y direction. And like I said, what's going to happen here is we're going to actually be manipulating the X scale. So like for instance, if it was 10% loaded, it would look like this, or if it was 50% loaded, it would look like that. So we're just going to leave it at 1 for right now, and then in script we'll be editing that value later. Alright, so that's our prefab. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. So our prefab then has that, and then now in our scene 2 that also has these updated variables. So now we actually need to manipulate the background, the progress bar, and the text in script. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to MonoDevelop. So first things that we need to do is obviously we need to be able to associate to these game objects. So I'm going to create a couple game objects. First one being the background. The second game object obviously being the text. And the third one, game object, being the progress bar. Okay, and then I also want to create a private variable that tracks, private int, that tracks the current load progress. We're going to start it off with set its default value to 0. Now, as you may have seen in Unity, I'll actually switch back. We're currently viewing this in the game view. So if I was to hit, actually I'll just show you. If I was to hit play right now, it would be right on the screen. We don't want that. So what we're going to actually do is go back to MonoDevelop, and in our start, we're actually going to hide the game objects. So background dot set active to false. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and change. We're going to do the text and then progress bar. So what's this is doing is now once the game loads, and I can actually show real quick, instead of, and that happened because I actually haven't associated those game objects to this. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to take background, associate it to the background variable, progress bar, associate it to progress bar, and text, associate it to the text. I'm going to go ahead and apply that because that's going to be the same across all our scenes. So now with that, it'll hide those. So as soon as that script loaded, or as soon as that script hit its start function, it set all of those objects active to false. And what we're going to do is when we need them, we're going to set them back to active to true. Alright, so now with that, the first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of this application.loadLevel call. And this is where our coroutines come into play. So coroutines are great because they're perfect for things that don't need to happen right in that frame. They actually can take multiple frames to process. So for things like animation, which we're kind of faking an animation here with the progress, we want to keep updating what's going on with the loading. That's going to take multiple frames, and a coroutine runs over multiple frames. So this is perfect for that. Another example, coroutines are really useful in like AI state machines, because that's another thing that you're going to have happen over several frames. So it's really useful. So a coroutine, we're actually going to call a function that's called display loading screen. This is actually a function that I'm about to write. So this isn't like some call that I'm making to Unity. And we're actually going to pass in level to load. We don't need to do that since it is a public variable to this class, but I just want to put that in to show that you can pass variables into coroutines for that. So we have our start coroutine. So once we call this, as soon as that spacebar in the frame that spacebar has hit, it's going to call this coroutine. So now we actually got to make that coroutine. So coroutines use the enumerator, and there it is. And we're going to do display. Well, actually, let me just copy it, make sure I don't loading. And then it's going to accept a string called level, and that's this level to load that we're passing in there. So open that and close it. Okay. So, and the first thing, since this is a coroutine, all coroutines require a yield returned statement. That means what it'll do is it'll run the coroutine until it hits the yield return null. Then it'll pass back to where this function call is, and then processing will continue to go on here. And with this coroutine still has what's the word I'm looking for? Still has things that are processing in it. It will start back off where this yield return null left off. And I'll actually show you in a second here how that works and how it works to our advantage here. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to set these guys back to active. So true, true, and true. Okay, so that way when I hit spacebar, it'll call the coroutine. These guys will now be displayed. The last thing, and last little setup thing I need to do here is I actually want to update the text real quick so that it doesn't show that loading progress for that first frame. It's going to show a little bit more informative statement. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do text.GUI text.text, and it's going to have, I'm going to set that text to loading progress. Then I'm going to concatenate the current load progress, which in this case would be 0 because that's what we initialized it to. And then I'm also going to concatenate a little % sign in there, so it says like 0%. And there we go. And oh, I actually forgot one last thing that I want to add in there for setup purposes. So I actually also want to set the progress bar to the current progress. So go ahead and grab the progress bar. I'm going to change its scale, so .transform .local scale equals a new vector 3. And so for the x, like I said, the x value is the one that we want to stretch across the screen so it shows a bar. I mean, if you want to do y, that's fine too. Just kind of doing more common thing with x stretching across. Like I said, we're just going to do from the center out. We could get a little bit fancier, and we could also change the position and start from like the left side of the screen and move it all the way across the right. But I'm going to keep it simple and just we're going to stretch from the center to the sides. So we need to taking our load progress into there, and then we're going to use its same, let me just copy this, we're going to use its y and z from before. That's not going to change. So there we go. So that'll update it to the current progress. All right, so all our setup's done. Now we get into the actual loading of the new level. So this is where our async operation comes in. So we're gonna create a new variable. It's going to be an async operation. We're going to name it async, and then we're going to make a call called application.load level async, and then we're going to pass in our level level string here. Like I said, I didn't need to do this here since I actually have a public variable to this class, but I just wanted to show you that you can pass in variables to coroutines. And go ahead and do it. So what this call does is, instead of like the application.load level, what this does is it actually spawns a background thread, and it starts loading whatever this level is in that background thread. And then as soon as that load has finished, it will just go ahead and switch to the next scene. So it's more seamless. There's no freeze. It just happens right away once this async is done. So while this is processing, we can continue to do updates on screen. So this is where we know this has started. So this is where we're going to switch it to just displaying the loading screen that we want. So what I actually want to do is I want to keep updating the async, or I want to keep updating the loading screen while async is loading. So what I can do that is I'm going to do a while statement. So while one of async's checks you can do is an is done, and it's a true/false statement. Obviously, it's going to be false, and then once it loads, it's going to destroy itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, while async is not done, so I'm going to check, is async done? If it's not done, then I want to update my stuff. And here's where I'm gonna put my yield return null. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through once here, and then I'm going to go ahead and give control back to here, and then at the next frame, since this coroutine is still running, it's going to leave off. So it's going to go back through the while statement, yield return null again, go back through the while statement until that async loading is done. Once that, and since how this call works is once the async is done, it's just going to automatically load the next scene. So in the meantime, while that's happening, we're going to update the screen. So first thing we want to grab is we want to update that load progress variable that we've been storing. So async, besides is done, also has a call called async.progress. And this is going to give us a value from 0 to 1 on what the current progress of the loading is. So we don't want 0 to 1. We actually want to do 1 to 100 since we're going to show percentage. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply that times 100. And we don't actually want all of the trailing floating point values. We just want the int value. So I'm going to convert it to an int and then store it in the load progress. So now we have our current loading progress. So I'm going to go ahead and update, just copy this line again, and update the text with the new loading progress. And then I also need to update the progress bar with the new loading progress. So that way it's gonna pass in those all those values to there. But we actually don't want load progress for that, because that's an int that's from 1 to 100. But this vector 3, we only want to be from 0 to 1. So I'm actually just going to make a call to async.progress, and that's going to give us the float value that we need for our bar right there. And there we go. That should be good. All right, so now I can go ahead and switch back to Unity. And we've got that all hooked up. The one thing I need to do, since I have applied changes to this prefab, I just need to jump over to scene 2, and I need to go ahead and update the level to load to scene 1. Oh, it did actually save that. I actually didn't need to switch that over there. Cool. All right, so I can actually see I'm getting a bit of an error. Let's see, where am I? Oh, silly. Forgot to add that. And looks like it's still giving me a hard time for something. Oh, I forgot to put local scale.y. I forgot that. Alright, so now that's more accurate. See no red. Cool. So switch back to Unity. And cool. Compiled, no errors. Alright, so we're good to go now. Go ahead and switch back to scene 1. Alright, so start. It's hidden it. Perfect. Hit spacebar. Good. It's loading. And perfect. The progress bar, as you can see, was pretty quick there, but it's adjusting to the percentage. It said loading progress 2, and then it's a little bit better. And see if we can. There we go. See, it's adjusting that. Again, if I was to make a build, that would be much more apparent. Now, one thing I just want to cover real quick is that with how this current implementation is, you actually won't ever see the text reach 100%. And that's because of the logic of how this while statement works and how the application.loadLevel async works. So as soon as this hits 100% progress, it's just going to go ahead and automatically load the next scene. And since this is an object in this scene, it's going to hit 100%, it's going to open the next scene, and this object's going to be immediately destroyed. So you'll get to like that 99.99 repeated percent, but you'll never actually see 100%. But in most cases, this is actually okay because you don't actually typically say what the percentage loading is. For You might do that on some web games, just so people, know and see where they're at. But that's just typically on the initial like preload of the game. Loading between that usually just show like an animation. So in this case, it might be just fine. However, if you do want to show the text of that, what you're going to have to do is you're actually going to have to do a little bit of extra work with not destroying this object once the new scene loads, and then updating it accordingly after that. However, I prefer this way because in most instances I just usually use an animation, and not having to show that last 100% value usually isn't necessary. So with that, I hope that's really helpful for you, and you're able to add awesome loading screens to your game. And again, have a great one.